Good day. Welcome to our Boardroom Forum live series on ESG disclosure requirements. Today we'll be speaking specifically around social transformation. Now, when we talk about ESG, we know it's environmental, social, and governance. But today we particularly want to focus on the S of social. And to speak to us a bit more about it, we've got Mpho Malaka, who's the PwC Social Transformation Leader, and Bontle Molapo, who's the Social Transformation Lead. Welcome, Mpho. Welcome, Bontle.
Thanks, Sumiti.
Thank you, Sumiti.
Mpho, to kick us off, I'm going to start with you as the Social Transformation Leader. So can you tell us a bit more about social transformation and how sustainability is embedded in the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, Sumiti, and thanks for the opportunity. The social transformation value proposition for PwC it was actually inspired by our new equation strategy, which is more around how do we help our clients how do we help clients to build trust, and how can we build, actually originally, how do we build trust with our clients and deliver sustained outcomes. So as we continue to engage clients, it became clear and apparent that the clients themselves, they've got their own stakeholders that they need to build trust with and be able to also develop sustained outcomes for them. So when we then came with the value proposition, we had to choose that we can't start all over. We have to have one industry that we can focus on so that we can start making meaningful impact in that industry. And then we chose the energy utilities and resources as an industry, specifically on the mining side. Now, when it comes to sustainability, when you started the discussion, you started with ESG. Generally, when we talk about ESG, we're looking at the environment part of it to say, if we're talking about the green movement, how do we make sure that we remove emissions in the process? It's more around if we don't do that, how will it impact society? However, the social transformation that we're talking about, the focus is on society itself, to say somebody's taking care of the E and somebody's taking care of the governance part of that E. But society is not only impacted upon by emissions. If people live, people must still be able to eat, they must go to school, they must have access to water and everything. Now, the spirit of the law in terms of the regulator for the mining, when they came with the different legislation, they were mindful of the fact that you cannot get into your community, come and mine, and then move out without making sure that some benefit accrues towards those communities. So we have things like the mining charter, which clearly specifies what benefits should go to women-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses, and so forth. And also you've got the requirement in terms of the act itself, which would say to you, you need to be able to make sure that you spend money in those communities. And that's where we find things like the social labor plans. Now, what does that mean in terms of sustainability? The essence of sustainability when you talk about social is to say, as you mine, can you make sure that the communities you drive access to resources and development is the sustainable manner during the life of your mining operation and beyond? And beyond, what does it mean? It means you need to also have plans that at the time that you stop the operations of the mine, people are not left stranded. So we've seen situations where the mine leaves and you've got a ghost town. So the social transformation value proposition that we bring as PwC is to say, how can we then work with our mining clients as the first angle of doing the social transformation to support them in making sure that we build programs that are going to be relevant to the socio-economic issues of that geography, so that at the time that the mines are operating, they can have access to opportunities in the area, and when the mine is gone, they can also have access to opportunities. So to measure that sustainability, you measure it according to the extent to which then when the mine leaves, people are not left stranded. Then you'll know that you've delivered sustained outcomes for the mining communities.
Thanks for that, Mpho. I think that's very insightful. I think it also provides a very good view around how social transformation applies in our current context, and particularly also in the mining sector. Bontle, perhaps if you can just give us some insights. Measurement, we know, is a crucial part of sustainability when it comes to understanding the social transformation impact that you're having, right? But how do we assist clients to make sure that they're able to measure the return on their social investment?
So, Zamita, I think let me take it a step back and just reiterate that there is a legislative requirement that mines do have plans in place in order to, what Mpo's already mentioned around the social labor plans. These social labor plans, for example, their lifespan is 5 years, and they are per each operation where the mine is in, they would have their own social labor plans. And each of these social labor plans will look at economic development, they look at employment, as well as social and, supplier and enterprise development. So effectively, what the mines will do is that they will then measure the benefits that each of these beneficiaries then derive from the programs that they will have in place under the social labor plans, for example. And this is then what they would report in, say, in their annual report and the ESG report. But over and above the social labor plans, there are other instruments that they also use. And I will use the collective term of community investment vehicles. And in here, I'm talking about, they could be community trusts that they develop, as well as other development programs that will be funded by the mine. So effectively, all of these, they would, in some instances, the mines even score themselves in their reporting to say, how much of an impact have we had in this particular community, based on whatever the program was for that financial year. So that's effectively how they would measure it. But if then I look at from our perspective, and as PwC, then what we would do then to measure the effectiveness of this is that we would look at, say, the completeness of the social labor plan, right? You look, for example, at the lifespan versus how long the mine will still be operating in that specific environment. To put it very simply, really, is to say, well, if the mine is going to end its operations in, say, the next 2 years, and this labor plan is valid for a 5-year period, what can be done in that period of time to make sure that there is some effective change, right, that they can effect with the social labor plan programs. Excuse me. And then the other thing as well that we also would look at is that, how do they then incorporate small businesses into their procurement processes? Because ultimately, when you think about enterprise development and supply development, right, that is where these mines can make a meaningful contribution to the communities, because ultimately you want them to form part of they must form part of the economy and make sure that they're running businesses that are either supporting the mine, or, as Mpo said earlier, that it's something that they can continue doing beyond the lifespan of the mining operations. And then lastly, what we also look at is their reporting mechanisms. We look at the validity, but also where are they obtaining the data and how far do they take it. So I'll use an example of, if, for example, part of the program was putting up a school, do they then follow those students to, say, beyond 5 years, for example, or does their responsibility or their reporting responsibility end at graduation? So effectively, that is what we would look at.
And what are you finding are some of the challenges that mines are facing in meeting these obligations?
So I think ultimately, mines are very aware of their obligation, right? But I think, if we have to be honest, we cannot just rely or depend on the mines to sort out the problem, right? I think it's broader than just what they can do. We're finding that, there's a lack of collaboration, right? And if there was more effective collaboration, for example, government with society stakeholders, as well as with industry, we could probably have a more meaningful impact. I'll use a different example. So if you look, for example, if you're building a hospital, right? So with regards to the requirements of the social labor plan, that mine would tick that they're compliant. They build a hospital because the community required a hospital. But then when you go and see what happens to the hospital thereafter, there's a shortage of staff, they do not have equipment, operating hours are unreliable, and that's something that is probably beyond what the mine can actually do, because there's not enough people going through the system, for example, that could then become eligible to work in the hospital. We know we've got all the issues that we have in government with regards to the supply and all of that. So, ultimately it has to be a joint effort, and hence I say that there has to be some collaboration.
If I could add on that, Zimiti, which is quite interesting, just to piggyback on what Buntle was talking about. She spoke about instruments that you use to drive development. So effectively, the development you're driving, if you're using other language, which is the government, from the government language, local government, you're talking about social and economic development. That's what we're talking about, but we're talking collaboration. And I'll embellish a bit of the thought when it comes to development. I mean, to collaboration. Let's take the example of a hospital. The mining houses, because we studying this there in the mining houses. The mining houses does spend money in terms of giving local community bursaries. Ne? Now, if you know that you're going to deploy a hospital in the next 5 years as part of your SLP, when you talk about alignment and collaboration, why in year 1 or year 2, when you plan to build the hospital in the next 4 years, should you not identify kids within that community who have passed matric, who wants to become nurses and whatever, and align the bursary so that at the time that you deploy a clinic, which is a primary healthcare facility, you already have staff too, because there are kids from there, they want to stay there. And then here's another collaboration when Bunte spoke about government. As you do that, this is where we would come in, because miners are supposed to be mining. How do we make sure that we support them to engage the relevant authorities like the Department of Health to say the mine is bringing these people, they will be finished in 3 years as qualified nurses, and we know that maybe a particular kids have been finished as doctors who must go and do health services. Structure your expenditure as this area to say, we will bring the doctors in for over a 2-year period of time so that we can make that facility available. That is when you talk in development. And the last leg of the collaboration is that usually in one line, you'd find different mining houses. So why should an SLP of mine A and an SLP of mine B, which have got budgets attached to them, not work collaboratively to maximize impact? Now, that is not the responsibility. People like us from business have got the responsibility to then plug in that gap. And how can we help you to set purpose, fit for purpose vehicle to drive that collaboration and maximize impact, given the realities that we're sitting within the country. So it cannot be that and the mines are not saying we want to come and tick the box. They're doing their best. That's what they know. But we need to then say, how do we come in as business and be able to help them to drive that in terms of maximizing impact in those communities.
And ultimately make a change.
Correct.
Ultimately make an impact. I mean, we can talk about a number of examples. A typical example as well. Take an OEM that is providing equipment that is operating in a mine. Now, here's another example of collaboration with that OEM. If you take a cohort of young kids in that community and say, okay, the engines that you are using are diesel engines, we're going to take this cohort and bring them to your head office where you train them and accredit them to become diesel mechanics, and help them to set up a mini OEM in that area, and they can service any equipment that is in any of the mining houses. Now, what do? You're de-risking the mines to be the only ones who are supposed to provide employment, because that cohort will now have an OEM. Then when you put them on an ESD program, it's very structured to say what you want to train them for, and they can provide that service now beyond the mine to any other business that is actually having a diesel. Mr. X can bring his bus to be serviced there, his truck. Now, that's what we talked about, leveraging the value chain and coming up with alternative economies. And that is at the heart of talking about socio-economic development in an area. The term we used is social transformation, because social transformation is about impacting positively the material conditions of the people in that particular area. So all these other things, when you bring them together, whether you call it socio-economic development, whether you call it ESD, the ultimate goal is one. You are mining in the area. How do you make sure that the people benefit? They are not going to become miners. Allow them to become what they're supposed to be and let the economy grow in those areas.
And Paul, thanks for that. I mean, I think it's very exciting, the work that you're doing in social transformation and just the impact that this would have in the communities in which many of these industries function. But perhaps any concluding remarks that you'd like to make?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Zamiti. Like I said in the beginning, we have taken a deliberate view that we want to start in one industry. We started in mining, but we know our communities are not only staying in around mining operations. There are other areas where it can. So this is the only start. All we are saying is that we have to work with government and our communities to change the face of the unemployment in this country. So it's just for you to watch the space as we start engaging different industries to make sure that we make an impact around transforming our societies. Thank you.
Mpho, it's very exciting. I think just the potential to change the communities and the societies in which the mines operate in. I mean, I think it goes a long way, and it's very exciting the work that you're doing in social transformation. Mpho Bontle, I'd like to thank you for your time today. And for those of you who have logged in, joined us this morning, thanks again, and look forward to you joining in our next session. Thanks.